Chapter 17. With the guards' voices thundering from up above, Jonathan yanked at his chains. Through the small window at the very top of his cell, he could see the sky was brightening, and still he was desperately trying to free himself. No matter how hard he pulled or which way he twisted, the chains stayed firmly attached to the thick stone of the cell's wall. Gritting his teeth, he pulled again, his eyes watering and his chest straining from the effort. Finally stopping, he sat there, panting. "You've been at it for days. It hasn't moved," said the huntsman. Jonathan ignored him, continuing to pull as the huntsman gave a deep, bone-rattling sigh. "What's the point anyway? Don't you understand? We've lost. She's more powerful than ever. Forget it." Jonathan tilted his head. Snow White had told him what the huntsman had done for her, how he had let her free, sent her racing through the woods away from the queen. Clearly, that hadn't ended well for him, and if Jonathan knew anything, it was how to use others' disadvantages to his advantage. It came with the whole thief persona, though he was most certainly putting that lifestyle behind him if he ever got out of there and back to Snow White. But for the moment, he would get help however he could. I did forget. Before I met Snow White, I forgot what courage was. She fought with us when she had every reason to run. She didn't give up on us. I can't give up on her." The huntsman stared at him thoughtfully, as if he were considering what Jonathan was saying. Then he stood and joined the younger man at the chain. They both grabbed hold and pulled with everything they had. And yet nothing happened. Their eyes met, and Jonathan nodded. They gave it another pull, with more strength than they'd ever been able to muster before. Suddenly, a whine of metal squealed into the air as the bolt retracted an inch. Jonathan and the huntsman shared a grin. The sound of metal on metal had been all the encouragement they needed. They pulled in bursts, harder and harder, as the bolt continued to slide from the wall at the painfully slow rate of fractions of inches. "Pull harder!" the huntsman encouraged. Not knowing where their energy came from, the two pulled harder than they'd ever pulled before. Finally, the bolt binged as it clattered to the ground. For the briefest of moments, the two men stood there, panting and sharing a smile. The huntsman nodded. "Go, before the guards return." Jonathan fixed him with a steely look of intent. "I'm coming back for you." There was not a dry eye in the forest. The seven had spent the past day creating a resting place for Snow White. None of them had the heart to dig a hole and bury the beautiful young girl. Even in death, she radiated light, and it seemed wrong to keep that from the forest creatures and inhabitants that had come to love her as their own. So instead, they had created a beautiful bed of wildflowers and lowered her onto it. They had crafted a tent of branches over it and placed a canopy of purple flowers above. Her dark hair fanned out around her, and her hands were clasped over her chest. She looked peaceful, and it was easy to forget that she wasn't just napping. But then a leaf would land on her still fingers, and Doc and the others would be reminded of what had really happened, of what the Queen had done to Snow White. And anger and rage and sadness would well up in all of them. Without Snow White there, several fights had broken out among them, but they hadn't lasted long. They gathered flowers and greenery and added it to Snow White's resting place. Tears fell unabashedly from their eyes as they worked. They were connected by their grief. Now, as the morning mist began to lift, they all gathered around Snow White. One by one, the seven friends approached the princess, holding their hats in their hands. They bowed their heads to the young woman. Dopey, unable to say the words that filled his heart, began to cry. Putting an arm around the youngest, Doc let him sob into his chest. No one was spared the sadness of the moment, not even Grumpy. Standing back from the others, he stared at Snow White. As usual, his arms were crossed, but as he looked upon her beautiful face, they slowly fell to his sides. At the same time, a single tear dripped down his cheek. then another, and another. Soon Grumpy was sobbing as well. Rubbing a hand gruffly over his face, Grumpy took a deep breath and approached Dopey, who looked up, his eyes red-rimmed. To everyone's surprise, Grumpy reached out and placed a hand gently on Dopey's arm. Then he nodded, as if to say, "I know you hurt. I hurt too." As Happy wiped away a tear, Grumpy leaned down and placed a bouquet of wildflowers by Snow White's side. They all sank to their knees, surrounding Snow White in a circle of friends and animals. Overhead, the sun rose higher, mocking their sadness with its brightness. They stayed that way, quiet and lost in their thoughts, for some time. Without saying it aloud, they had all agreed to stand vigil until what? Or when? They didn't know. There was a rustling in the forest. Looking up, Dopey saw Jonathan emerge from the trees. The young man's clothes were a mess. There were leaves in his hair and scratches on his face. But the worst thing of all was his devastated expression when his eyes landed on Snow White. Dopey nudged Doc, who turned and, spotting Jonathan, nudged the next. It continued that way until they were all aware of Jonathan's presence. They got to their feet, making way for him to approach Snow White. He did so slowly, his shoulders heavy, his head low. When he reached Snow White's side, he dropped to his knees. His whole body seemed to sink into itself as he stared at her still form. His hand twitched at his side, as if he was resisting the urge to reach out and touch her cheek. Doc watched, his heart aching for the young man. From the looks of him, he had done everything in his power to get to Snow White before the Queen did, and he had failed. Now the guilt of that clearly weighed as heavily on him as the loss of all that could have been. Doc might have been the head of the group, but he had a heart, too, a big one, and it hurt. For Jonathan, for his friends, for the bandits, for the kingdom, and for Snow White. He walked to Jonathan and put a hand on his back. He could feel the young man's rapid heartbeat and knew Jonathan was on the verge of losing his composure. Choking back a sob, Jonathan finally tore his gaze from Snow White and looked at Doc. He gave him a small smile of thanks. Then, taking a breath, he composed himself. Reaching out, he gently placed his hand on top of Snow White's. He looked down at his rough fingers atop her smooth ones, and Doc knew what he was thinking, without the words being spoken. Had he been a fool to believe that dreams could come true? That they could have found each other and lived a happily ever after of their own making? When Snow White's hand did not move, Jonathan's face grew sadder. The Queen had taken her from him. From all of them. With nothing left to lose, Jonathan leaned forward and placed a gentle kiss on her lips. It was just a brush, the faintest whisper of a kiss, but it held his heart and all the promises he would never be able to make. It was a kiss of pure, true love. Pulling back, Jonathan moved to stand. There was nothing more he could do. He needed to leave this place, fill his head with thoughts of anything but Snow White. And then, Snow White's eyes fluttered open. Snow White didn't want to open her eyes. Her head ached and her limbs felt heavy. But something was pushing her to wake up, a tingling sensation on her lips that slowly spread through her body, replacing the sluggish feeling with lightness. Hope flared in her chest, and she thought she heard a dozen people inhaling collectively. Taking a breath of her own, she opened her eyes. The first thing she saw was Jonathan's face. He was hovering above her, a look of awe and wonder etched into his handsome features. She felt a smile spread over her own face when she realized that he had kept his promise. He had come back for her. Reaching out, she took his hand in hers and squeezed. His eyes filled with tears, and for a moment she wondered why. She turned her head and saw everyone gathered in a circle around her. They looked exhausted, their own eyes brimming. And then she remembered. The hag. The apple. She had taken a bite, and then could do nothing but listen in horror as the queen revealed herself and her evil intentions. The last thing she recalled was the wicked laugh echoing through the forest, and then everything had gone dark. But now there was light. She saw it radiating from Jonathan. She felt it in her lips, where he must have kissed her to break the queen's curse. Wasn't that how those things worked? The queen hadn't said as much, but true love was the most powerful thing in the world, which meant Jonathan loved her? Her heart bursting, Snow White slowly sat up. For a long moment she stared into Jonathan's eyes, silently thanking him. Then she leaned forward and kissed him right back. All around her she heard gasps of astonishment. "What in the world?" Doc said, his cheeks turning redder than usual at the kiss. "I can't believe it," Grumpy said. At that, everyone began to cheer. The tension that had filled the clearing broke as everyone celebrated. Snow White watched them, marveling at this family she had found in her darkest moments. She felt as if she were waking from a nightmare to a dream she could never have imagined. Sensing Jonathan's eyes on her, Snow White turned back to him. Gently, he reached up to cradle her face with his hands. She smiled, lifting her own hand to rest on his. There was so much she wanted to say, so much had changed. But then she thought of the queen and her vicious words, and her smile faded. She got to her feet and moved away from the bed of flowers she had been resting on to a spot where she could be alone. Jonathan waited a moment and then followed. He stood at her back. She knew the others were watching as well. They were confused by her reaction. She should be happy too. She had escaped the queen's curse. But now she knew the truth. Her father had not been so lucky. "What is it?" Jonathan asked, putting a hand lightly on her shoulder. "What's wrong?" Snow White nearly cried at the kindness in his voice. She had spent so much of her life alone, hiding by a well, whispering wishes no one could hear. Her voice shook as she answered. "My father, he's gone forever. Murdered by the queen." She heard the hushed gasps of her friends and the bandits who had just arrived. Her announcement didn't impact just her. It impacted the entire kingdom. For so long, the one thing that had kept hope alive was that the king might still be there, just in hiding. But the queen had dashed that dream when she found Snow White in that cottage. As the seven kneeled, hats in their hands, in deference to the fallen king, Snow White's heart ached for all of them. Most of all, she ached for what the queen had taken from her, and from what she had revealed to her. "Oh no!" Doc exclaimed. "What will we do now?" Happy asked. A hush fell over the clearing as Snow White hung her head in sadness. She knew that was not what her friends expected of her. They wanted her to reassure them that everything would be all right. But she couldn't. Not anymore. The queen had shoved her hope and fairness in her face and proven they were useless. Being brave wouldn't bring back her father. Being fair wouldn't stop the queen. Being honest only made people hurt. She wasn't sure how long she stood like that, letting the silence envelop her and the hurt flood her heart. She didn't know how to move on from there. Where would she go? She couldn't go back to the castle, and the cottage would be too crowded. She lifted her head and saw Snow White watching her, Jonathan watching her, an unreadable expression on his face. The bandits stood behind them, and for a brief moment, she wondered if she might not join them on the road. She had managed to outwit the queen's guards. Maybe she would be of use to the thieves. She sighed. She knew that was as silly an idea as all the silly wishes she had spoken into the well. Her future was blurry and bleak. Then, a single snowflake floated down from the sky, dancing gently before landing on Snow White's nose, and she smiled softly, knowing what had to be done. "It's time." Time? Jonathan questioned. Time to restore our kingdom, Snow White declared with a strength she had always wondered whether she possessed. The weight of Snow White's words created a heavy blanket of gravity that covered them all. No one responded. They all looked toward each other as they wondered how they would go about such a momentous task. It won't be easy, Snow White said. She'll do everything she can to stop us. Let her try, Dopey said. The youngest of the 7 friends, who had not uttered a word in over 200 years, was speaking in front of everyone. His cheeks were red, his hands a little shaky, but he was doing it. Because of Snow White's kindness, Dopey had found his voice. Dopey? Snow White asked, watching the miner toe the grass with his shoe as he tried to pretend that all eyes were not on him. We're not afraid. Listening to Dopey, Snow White realized that she didn't have to be afraid either. She was fearless, fair, brave, and true. These traits didn't make her weak. They made her strong. And no matter what the Queen said, those attributes were what had made their kingdom great. She stared around at her new family, the one she had chosen, and realized that as much as she had helped them, they had helped her. Without them, she would never have known the strength hidden in her heart. In finding them, she had found herself. Standing up straight, Snow White let the last of her self-pity wash away. There was no denying it. She would never be the same person she had once been. When she bit the apple, a part of her innocence had been taken from her. In that way, perhaps the Queen had won. But she had only won a battle. She hadn't won the war. If anything, she had helped clear the way for Snow White to seek victory. For only in being shown the truly ugly nature of the Queen could Snow White see the absolute beauty in the love and strength of her friends, of herself. Her innocence might have been lost, but now she had an idealism and a sense of reality that was grounded in what truly mattered. Not the approval the vain Queen so desperately sought that left her alone in a stone fortress. Life was far more than that. It was warmth, a hand in a hand, a hug when you needed it. It was sacrificing yourself for the one you loved, and it was taking a chance on the uncertain future. Then neither am I, she said, a new strength in her voice. She paused and looked around at the group, at Jonathan's clear eyes, her 7 friends' wide smiles, and the bandits' raised brows. Follow me. The clearing erupted in voices and chirps and squawks as everyone, human, magical creature, and animal, began to speak at once. There were shouts of yes and let's do it, along with groans of we couldn't and it's not possible. Snow White let them react. She had expected as much. But as they got closer to the edge of the forest, everyone and everything began to grow quieter and quieter until there was silence. Far in the distance, beyond the village, the castle loomed. Snow White felt it was watching and waiting for them. Taking a deep breath, she looked at Jonathan. His eyes were kind and strong, and they told her that he and his group of bandits were on board with any plan she came up with. With a simple nod of her head, she signaled that it was time.